All right, we'll see if this tech works pretty well, but we're going to continue to talk about hair, right? There's a little bit left to say about hair. We'll talk about skin glands and some other things related to functions of the skin after that. And so the nice thing about pigments of the hair is that it's similar to pigments of the skin, and that we're going to be talking about epidermal melanocytes again. So hair pigments get produced or directed by epidermal melanocytes. We're doing cursive today because otherwise you get a lot of tapping, and I've been told that that's annoying. Melanocytes, right? So just like in the skin, these melanocytes are able to take tyrosine amino acid, enzymatically convert it into a couple of different pigments, right? So these pigments aren't proteins exactly, right? They're amino acid derivatives of the amino acid tyrosine. Okay, and it's the epidermal melanocytes that line the follicle, right? So we talked about the depression where the follicle sits and how that's lined with epidermal cells. Some population of those cells that go down into the layer of the dermis, right? Those are melanocytes. And so they produce eumelanin. Eumelanin is a pigment that is most common, and it gives a brownish black color. So you can imagine that as these cells of the hair are being pushed upward, right, they're gathering in these granules, these melanin granules. A large melanin granule would appear black, right? Slightly smaller granules might have a reddish tint to them. Eumelanin is the most common of the hair granules. And so it's the case that brown, right, is the most common hair color. Phenomelanin is the pigment that's produced by melanocytes that give a blonde or red hair. B-L-O-N-D. There we go. And again, this depends a little bit on the distribution. How many phenomelanin granules are there in particular cells? Gray hairs, I'm going to go up top here. Gray hairs are a mixture of both pigmented and unpigmented cells. Right? So in this case, certain melanocytes won't deposit pigment anymore, and others will, and so that hair will appear gray. And when someone's hair turns perfectly white, there's no melanin being produced at all. And in fact, those hair follicles, right, actually have kind of hollow spaces where the melanin granules would be. So hair color, skin color, similar, right, in terms of the melanocytes, tyrosine amino acid, different flavors of melanin, different sizes of the granules, right? All of that follows. I'm going to skip talking about muscle attachment because we did it already, right? We talked about erector pili muscles and how they attach to the hair bulge. And so if you have goosebumps, the erector pili muscle contracts to lift the hair up, right? So we won't say anything more. We're not going to take any more notes on that. Instead, we'll skip ahead. Let's see if I can figure this out. To talk about skin glands, right? So we've talked a lot about the epidermis and the dermis and the connective tissue there and the hair and et cetera, right? But we should mention that there are some glands in the skin as well. The first one, right, that we'll talk about are sebaceous glands. These glands typically associate with hair follicles, if present. So associate with hair follicles. And you can see the sebaceous glands here, right, that are surrounding the follicle. These are holocrine glands. holocrine secretions, right? And so if you remember what that means, right, how these cells basically deteriorate and release the entirety of what they once were into the gland itself, okay, holocrine. What they secrete is a fatty material and the cellular debris that goes along with these degenerating cells, right? So holocrine, and they secrete a lipid-based secretion, so a lipid substance. And this lipid substance increases the softness and the flexibility of the hair, right? And so your body is sort of conditioning the hair and waterproofing the hair via these sebaceous secretions, right? And so hair that's not washed regularly might feel waxy or have a shine to it. It's because it's loaded with this lipid secretion, right? It's the case that these sebaceous glands can also open on the surface of the skin directly, right? So maybe we should put that there. May open directly to skin surface. May open directly to skin surface, and the function here is the same, right? To produce a softening, sort of conditioning effect, and to aid in waterproofing. Sweat glands come in a couple of different flavors, a couple of different types, but in either case, right, they have the same anatomy in that they're these coiled structures, right, with long ducts that often run to the surface. So what can we say about sweat glands? Right, and I'm just trying to conserve space here a little bit. That's why I'm writing all over these pictures. Sweat glands are ball-shaped coils that are relatively deep in the dermis. Okay. These glands are lined with sweat-secreting epithelial cells, right? So if we look in here, the lining of these glands are these epithelial cells that secrete. I mentioned two flavors. The first that we should talk about are merocrine sweat glands. That's sloppy. Merocrine, M-E-R-O-C-R-I-N-E, merocrine, right? Merocrine glands are the most common type of sweat gland. And they respond to temperature. So if you recall what a merocrine gland is, right, it's a cell that, or a gland, I should say, that secretes its product without any loss to the cells that make it up, right? A multicellular gland that's exocytosing its product, right? What's in sweat? I'm going to come up to the top here. Sweat consists of water, of course, salts. So if you've ever allowed sweat to dry on your skin, it feels sort of grainy. That's because the salts that are present. Also urea and uric acid. These are both byproducts of protein metabolism and what you find in urine, right? So another way to get rid of these protein metabolites is through sweat. Okay. Merocrine glands are a different type of sweat gland than the second type we should talk about, which are apocrine. Apocrine sweat glands develop a scent, right? So when someone talks about body odor, right, they develop a scent. And it's based on how they function, right? Merocrine glands release their products via exocytosis. Apocrine glands have portions of the cell that pinches off, right? We talked about how not the entire cell, but chunks of the cell sort of deteriorate and get squeezed off. And it's the case that bacteria feed on those parts of the cell that get pinched off. So they develop scent because bacteria consume the secretory product. Right, and so within apocrine secretions, you find lipid and some protein, right? Because again, this was pinched off portion of the cell, and that's a good food source for bacteria. Whereas the sweat secretions here from merocrine glands were a lot more water. Apocrine secretions are slightly different in their chemical nature, and it allows bacteria to feed on them, basically, right? And so think about where apocrine glands are. Under your armpits, for example, right? There's a high density of apocrine secretions, and the bacteria that reside there then produce the scent. So it's not the secretion that has the scent, it's the bacterial population that has the scent. And so, you know, if you're working out and you sweat from your arms or your forehead, right, that's a merocrine secretion, and that doesn't have an odor, right? That doesn't smell like an apocrine secretion does. Of gland to talk about that I didn't put on the bullet pointed part of the slide is what's called a ceruminous gland. I should say that right, ceruminous gland. These are the glands in your ears, right, in the canal of your ears that make earwax. Right, so they're localized only to the ear canal, right? We'll talk about this in the next semester, the tympanic cavity, the tympanic canal. And this secretion helps to prevent things from getting into the ear, from large things to get into the ear, and preventing vibration to get into the ear, and so you can't hear as well, right? And so a little bit of wax here produced by these glands is a good thing, right? So ceruminous glands make earwax. Oftentimes people want to know how acne is related to secretions of certain glands, right? And so acne is actually driven by hormones. So it's the case that adrenal glands these are glands that sit right up on your kidneys, on the top of your kidneys, and we'll talk about them next semester. They increase production of what are called androgens. Androgens are responsible for a lot of secondary sex characteristics. Testosterone is derived from a type of androgen, okay? And what one effect of these androgens is, or what they can do, is they can increase sebum production, right? So these androgens, this hormone, these hormones, it's a family, right? So I should back up and be a little clear here. Androgens are a category of hormones, right? And these category of hormones, which include testosterone, help in the development of secondary sex characteristics as you go through puberty. But another thing that they can do, right, what another effect that these androgens have is they stimulate production of sebum. All right, so we talked about sebaceous glands, right, secreting this waxy, fatty material. That's sebum. And so it's the case that acne is not caused by uncleanliness or eating fatty food or anything like that. The problem is when we try to treat acne, right, and you say, well, wash your face, one can remove the surface level of sebum, but the sebaceous glands continue to secrete, right? So it's the continuation of sebum production even if you clear it off. We'll start the next video talking about how acne can be treated.